I'd like to welcome you all to the first TAPS public consultation for the Office of Food for Peace strategy update. This will be our first of 3 consultations where we're very happy to have the PBO give some input and information to FFP for their strategy update process. Today's topic is social accountability and governance. We'll be having 2 more sessions, one on February 4th that will focus on social protection, and one on February 11th that will deal with conflict. Don't worry if you didn't get all that. At the end, we're going to put up a slide with that information. Plus, most of you are familiar, hopefully, with TAPS and the Food Security and Nutrition Network. So we go ahead and we advertise through our newsletter and also on our website. Okay. So just a couple of things I want to go over. First of all, we do have people not only in the room, but also online. And we want to make sure that everybody can hear and participate. So I know when we're talking, everybody kind of likes to jump in there, and that's great. We really encourage that. But try to jump in once we get the microphone to you. So please hold your hand, and we'll get it there as quickly as possible. So that way, it will stop us from repeating, and people can keep going the free flow of ideas. Another thing is that we will have a break at 10:45. So we will leave the coffee and food out there, so never fear, there will be a way to refuel. So just yes, Suzanne's very happy about that already. So also I would like to make welcome today. It's a very exciting session. First of all, our representatives from Food for Peace, we have Joan Whalen, and then also we have Susan Bradley. And then one of our exciting activities is that we have, there's a few others, I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you all for being here. And then also one of our activities is we have panelists, and I'd like to introduce them real quick. First of all, we have Randy Tiff from World Vision, Laura Russell from CARE, and Bob Gosselman, did I get that right? Yes, from CRS. And I'm very excited. We have a special guest here all the way from down under in Australia. That is Bill Walker from World Vision Australia. So thank you. So that's very exciting for us. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is this is a TAPS event, so we need you all to get to know each other. So we're going to do an icebreaker. And what I would like you guys all to do is get in groups of 3, and I want you just to talk for a few minutes and try to find out 3 things you have in common. Now there's a couple of things that are off limits. First of all, you can't get in a group and say we all have brown hair. Looks, clothes are off limits. Also what you do. Everybody here works in development, more or less, so those kind of things are often. So if I could ask you to go ahead and get in groups of 3 and begin talking and to find out what you have in common, and we'll take a few minutes to do that. So everybody up. I'm sorry. And go ahead.
So for those of us online, maybe this is a good time to take a moment and let's use the chat box. Could we introduce ourselves and what organization we're coming from, and maybe what city we're connecting from?
So. Okay, just very quickly, does anyone have anything they want to share about what they learned about maybe themselves and to other people that they had something in common with? Laura, how about you? You're smiling?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm apparently very challenging to find. We had like 2 out of 3 for a bunch of them, but we did eventually manage to find 3 things we had in common.
Okay.
Though we're all gathered here today, none of us lives in the Washington. None of us is originally from the Washington D.C. area. Mm-hmm. We all live in Maryland.
Oh.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you. Welcome back. Hope you get a little bit of caffeine there, feeling a little bit better. For those of you online, I'm really sorry I keep making all the references to coffee and food and you don't have any access to them. Apologize about that. Once again, I'm going to hand it over to Joan Whalen for Food for Peace, and she is going to go ahead and lead you into the next activity. So thank you.
Hi. Well, we have a pretty meaty discussion question that we're going to give you. But first, I just want to make sure we've got a really crowded table back there, and we have one man sitting all by himself here, and a pretty empty table here. If we could just kind of consolidate and move around a bit, and make sure the tables are a little more even. Maybe some of you from the back can move over here, and Laura and Barb, you could join some of the other groups, and just make an effort to not be sitting with someone from your own organization or someone that you talk with all the time, because really we want a little cross-pollination here. Okay. So good, we've got 3 people here. Do you want to join another table, Catherine? Okay, we've got 4 here. I think there's someone on the other side with the people. Great. Maybe Okay. So we'll talk for half an hour and then try to leave enough time for what will likely be a very rich discussion afterwards. And without further ado, let me just go to the question. It's one our panelists saw in advance, so you'll find that the panelists at the tables will be very well prepared to talk about this. But the question is, what are the major constraints that you have faced in supporting social accountability, and how have you addressed them? And this can be in your own work, or the work that you've seen, or the work that you've heard about for those that haven't been directly implementing programs. What have you learned from the experience you feel we should carry forward into the future? Now, we've talked about, different levels of the system, different levels of the government, different aspects, cultural dynamics, economic, across the spectrum. It's up to you at your table to really look at what kind of constraints you're going to address, and I think we're going to get very different responses from every table, but we'll leave half an hour to discuss it now. What are the major constraints you've encountered? What have you learned from the experience? What can you help us carry forward into the future? We'll leave half an hour for discussion, as I said, and then come back and have about 45 minutes to report out table by table. You may want to nominate, there are poster boards here, desktop easels with flip chart paper here. You may want to take notes so that when you do report out on what the key issues that your table discussed, help that. And are there any questions about this exercise? Everybody else set? Okay, good. So happy talking. Yes? Please nominate someone who will be prepared to report out for your table.
Hi, everybody online. So in just a moment, we're going to be doing a small group activity ourselves. And so in order to do that, I'm going to need everybody to activate their mics. You'll notice, for those of you who don't have your mics activated yet, that at the top of your screen, you're going to see, in your Adobe Connect window, you're going to see a green icon that's a speaker icon. And that ensures that your audio is working. And then to the right of that is a microphone icon. And when your microphone is activated, it will be green. So you're going to click on that until it goes green to activate it. If at that point your audio still isn't working, you might have to use the drop-down arrow to select the correct microphone setting for your computer. So those are the things that you need to do to activate your microphone. We're going to go into small groups, so you're going to want to have your microphone working so that you can discuss with people in your groups. We're going to have 2 groups, and there's going to be about 5 or 6 people per group. So when you do get into your small groups, if you could discuss the question that's on the left, and then if you could select a spokesperson for your group who can help share out at the end with the folks in the room, and also a note taker who will be typing in the window to the left, typing notes from the conversation. So for those of you who are having microphone issues, I will continue to work with you. You also notice that there's in the web links box above the chat box, there's a video that will kind of show you how to activate your mic if you're still kind of having trouble visualizing how to do that. So we're going to go into breakouts now, and feel free to chat me directly to work with me if you're having issues still activating your mic. All right, here we go.
Troop now.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hey everybody, so I know we've got microphones activated for Christy, for Tanya, and who was the other person? Debbie? Yeah, Debbie, I think we got yours up and going, right? Actually, it looks like Jennifer's online too. Jennifer, could you test your mic out? I'm seeing you activated on my end, but maybe you're muted on through your computer or something like that. But I think at this point, we have a smaller crowd than we did before the break, so I think one group is appropriate. And I think we're in the room. We're going to just turn it over to you all to go ahead and discuss the question to the left, and we're going to give you all access to the notes. Do we have a volunteer to be the note taker for this session? Who can be the note taker?
I don't mind note taking.
Who is that? Tanya?
Debbie.
Debbie.
No,
Gotcha.
Debbie.
Gotcha. Okay, Debbie. So I'm gonna go ahead and make you a presenter, and that way you should be able to type directly into the box to the left, and that'll allow you to take notes as people are talking. Oh, there you go. Yeah. Great. So yeah, at this point I'm going to turn it over to you all and let you have a conversation around the question.
I'm happy to start.
Go for it.
So I think one of the major constraints that I see, and I actually sit within CARE on the policy side, so not the program implementation side. So my comment comes from that perspective, but it goes back to what I said about building the capacity of governments to engage across ministries and with citizens. There ends up being this tension because we want governments to engage citizens. So from a civil society perspective, that's what we're advocating very strongly for, is participatory approaches. But we also recognize that the government may not be able to do that. And so then we also end up advocating on their behalf, and it almost sounds contradictory. I think one of the most important things that we can do from, say, a U.S. program perspective is to try to link together some of our work through Food for Peace or Feed the Future or the Global Climate Change Initiative with some of the democracy and governance work, so that we're, as the U.S., pushing for participatory approaches by governments, but also by NGOs like CARE through implementation programs, but then also, on the other hand, with the D&G funding, helping build the capacity of governments to continue to engage with their citizens.
Tanya, let me know if I've missed anything or how you want it written, like.
Okay, I'll type something in the chat box maybe, just so that the discussion can keep going.
Sure.
Tanya, I'm going to go ahead and make it so that you can type over there too, in case you want to, modify. Any other comments from anybody else in the group? Maybe we can just go down the list. Jean, do you have anything you'd like to add? And if your audio isn't working, you're welcome to use the chat box as well if you'd like. Jennifer, anything you'd like to add to the conversation? Your thoughts around this question? Could be that people stepped away from their computers. So Debbie and Tanya, it looks like it's mainly the two of you. And if others want to jump in, they're welcome to. But we'll let you two kind of dig into this question.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I have limited experience in this with Food for Peace and even just my work in general. So a lot of this for me is like education. I'm here to learn and to find out how to go forward. So unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot to contribute.
I think they are really looking for experiences from outside perspectives, though. So I don't think it I mean, I think your perspective is seen as very valuable, especially in the comments you've made so far. So don't be shy.
Debbie, what part of World Vision do you work in?
I'm a program development advisor with food programming. So I work with our program management group specifically. But
Okay.
I used to work for World Vision Canada, so a lot of my experience is from a Canadian perspective, and that's why I have limited experience with Food for Peace and USAID grants, but I am responsible for them, so that's why I'm here to have these discussions and to learn, and any opportunity I can have to build my own capacity in learning.
Are there any insights that you would share then from because you have a familiarity with Canadian approaches, if World Vision Canada has really focused on weaving in different tools for social accountability, or is there any experience that you see from that perspective that maybe can, in a general way, inform what the U.S. is doing?
Yeah, I just really haven't been exposed to a lot of this stuff. It would have been the things discussed earlier on citizen voice in action and things like that, but again, it's not been like it hasn't been a main focus for me. I'm just kind of building my own capacity in this area.
Sure. And I'll be honest, I've not worked directly with Food for Peace programs. So again, my comments are sort of on the general side of the challenges that any group has in weaving in social accountability, but addressing how we build a system that enables social accountability.
Mm-hmm. I guess one of my reflections from the conversation earlier, when the gentleman mentioned about the circles of an onion, I also see accountability as a continuum of growth, and we as organizations need to start, I don't know, sometimes I feel like we come in and we want them to be responsible for large changes in their social structures and things like that, but it might even be that we need to drill down a little and start at some of the earlier stages with self and family and things like that. So yeah, that's just one of my reflections.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because we often look at the overall, the big picture. The big picture is oftentimes easy to see. There's major gender inequality. How do we fix that? But it often does need to start at the household level, if that's what you mean. It's sort of just working for small change within a household, which then ripples out to the community.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
That's something that CARE has an alliance with WWF, and one of the early lessons that we tackled between the two of us was around this notion of community. Because for a long time everybody talked about community engagement, but if you don't drill down within the community, you're only going to end up talking to the community elites.
Right.
Because those power structures exist at every single level, from global geopolitics to a husband and wife inside their home. Right. And that starting at that most localized level is key. What I find challenging then, though, is that if we only talk about the household level, we never manage to connect it back to the policy change that's also potentially needed. And it's not an...
Yeah, I guess it has to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. It's not an either-or. It's firing on all those cylinders. Working at the most local household level and within a community is critical. And then also, like you said, the top-down, working with government to make sure that they are engaging their citizens and not just doing that in the Capitol. A consultation is not bringing in, to be honest, care and world vision in the Capitol. It's actually getting out into communities. And that's really what is oftentimes hard for governments or for donors, because that costs money. But from a sustainability perspective, the social sustainability, not the environmental side, that's really critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Hi, this is Christy Tabai.
Oh, hi, Christy.
Hi, I just wanted to add, because I think, Debbie, you hit on a really important point about communication and starting at the household level. And I think one of the things that I've seen in programming is the difficulties in getting people to communicate, and at times I've seen failures by government in the field because one ministry won't talk or work with another, which really, one, prevents implementers from implementing strategies and activities that they have agreed upon at an earlier time, and then a change in government, brings new leadership, and that makes it really difficult for people sometimes to carry through, or implementers to carry through with activities, because you now have people that don't want to talk with each other. But this communication, even like you said, at the household level, and it goes back to power dynamics and people finding their voice to speak and feeling like they have the space to do that, I think is so important. And that just plays, I think, a huge role in being able to accomplish a lot of the work and having that a strong piece around social accountability.
Right, and it also allows for what was mentioned earlier, which is reaching the most marginalized and those who would most likely not have a voice.
Exactly.
I totally agree with that, and I love your point as well, Christy, about ministries that can't or won't work together. The power dynamics between ministries are kind of amazing in an unfortunate way. I come back to the climate example, because I come from a climate advocacy perspective at times, and you get to the climate talks at a global level, and it's the environment ministers. And so when you start talking about finance for climate activity, they want to hang on to that power, because when they get back home, they don't have power among ministries. It's the finance minister that does. And so there's this power play within the global negotiations even to make sure that the environment ministers are able to hold on to some power. And so then they're sitting there trying to protect their own power and not necessarily grappling with the global geopolitics or the need to target climate work to support vulnerable populations.
And we see that so often too, where people just don't have buy-in to the broader picture, and that is really frustrating. People are really we see this at all levels where people will act in their own best interest instead of thinking for the good of the community. And I don't know how to change that. I mean, how do you get people to get buy-in? In certain cases, you can get community buy-in if you see that there's a project that's going to benefit everyone. So, trying to get a better water system installed in a community that involves multiple players in order to make that happen, and everybody's willing to chip in because everybody benefits. But I think what happens when someone, becomes disempowered or someone loses or isn't going to gain benefits? I mean, what's the purpose of even participating? So there has to be some incentive, I think, that's shown for people to really have that buy-in. And like you're mentioning, if someone is going to lose some type of power, they have no incentive at all to participate. That's a great example.
I think this is what I would love to see, or I would love to see USAID even, or other agencies in the U.S. government engaging with their counterparts. Because this is a challenge we see in the U.S. as well. If there's an interagency process, there are power dynamics, and those have to be addressed, or it's hard to carry things forward. So that's almost an opportunity for that government-to-government technical assistance that helps build the capacity of governments to do their job well.
Yeah, can I just make one more comment? It also sparked another thought on the demand side, which is establishing a strong enough power voice of the community itself for ownership, and continuing to keep the pressure on the government is another major constraint, because you can empower small groups of people, but unless we have like a majority or a large enough sector that cares enough about this, with these power dynamics and changes of governments and things like that, it's not going to be sustainable.
So what the food for peace is in all of this, I'm not sure. But I think, when I look at this, I feel like Food for Peace has an opportunity to really work with, on two fronts. One, with implementing partners to encourage a prioritization of social accountability as one of those kinds of interventions that has a lasting impact, but then also to work within USAID with the democracy and governance team and with the Bureau of Food Security, so that you're, along with a bunch of other bureaus, but so that you're linking efforts at a top level or a bottom level and in between.
Hey, Debbie and Can you guys hear me?
Yes. I can.
Sorry, I keep going in and out. So we're having some connection issues here in the room, but what we'd like to have happen is we're about to get back together and have sharing out. So if Debbie or Tanya, would one of you be willing to kind of share out some of the, the major points that you all discussed as a group with the people in the room? We would then activate your audio so that folks in the room could hear what you're saying over your computer speakers.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay, that was Tanya, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay, I was just making sure. All right, great. Then we'll give you the cue, and as soon as they kind of go to the group online or they say that in the room, then feel free to start talking, and the speaker should be activated by then. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tanya.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks. That was a good discussion.
Yeah, it was.
Great. Well, in an effort to get you all out of here on time, we're going to go around and let each of the groups share some of the key points you discussed in the course of this. I'd like to try to set a time limit on that because I know everyone has so much to say. So 5 minutes per group to get across your key ideas, and we can just have time then to hear from everybody, including a group that Patrick and Julia were facilitating an online group as well for some of our remote participants. So with that said, is there anyone that would like to go first? One of our in the room groups? Anyone itching to get their ideas out there first? Yeah. Okay. And I think this one wins the award for the most organized note taking as well. Sure. Yeah. No? Anywhere that's comfortable for you?
All right. So a lot of this followed from some of the discussion we had when the panel was up. Thank you. One of the challenges we have is that there's a perception that community members are incapable of articulating their own interests, so that they're unable to demand anything from the local officials, particular access, better access to public services. And the response there is sort of what we talked about in the discussion before the break, organizing people in small groups, associations, community-based organizations, so that they can access and take action on public information, whether it's understanding what the laws are, et cetera, so forth, and what their rights are within the laws. And some examples of these would be parent-teacher associations in Liberia, farmers groups. So the approach would be you're strengthening the community-based organization, at least internally initially, so that when they're applying practices of good governance internally, now they have the experience and the confidence to demand the same from their locally elected or appointed officials. So it's using capacity strengthening as a springboard for collective action. Another is the remoteness of action, remoteness of vocation. We really didn't get too much on a response to that, but I'm just now reading this to continue from this approach of strengthening community-based organizations. One of the things that's really key here is we've found, at least I have personally, that the same people who are members or leaders within these parent-teacher associations or farmers groups also happen to be the same folks who are the members of the locally elected councils. And they're the ones often who will take the initiatives to say, hey, what we've been doing in this context, we also need at the local council. One of the big challenges also is just the nature of society in these countries where we work. They're patriarchal, they're hierarchical, and it discourages individual citizens as well as collective action. And one of the things we can do is to try to sensitize elites to view that their own self-interest can be served by addressing those interests of the community. And we weren't too clear about that, but more thinking to be done, I guess. And then there's the contextual stuff that we talked about before break as well, that often there's a lack of political will or interest in supporting community level efforts. There's weak governance structures or institutions, particular weak or lack of fiscal decentralization, because as Bob mentioned in his presentation, it's difficult to deliver services when you don't have revenues as a basis for that. So Garth asked specifically what would be for Peace's role in addressing this, and our answer was, well, by all means support this stuff, the community level efforts, but also, at that high level, as a donor, be able to engage the host country government in policy dialogue, creating spaces where there can be broader dialogue with societal actors, civil society, the for-profit sector as well. And a good example of that is what we're seeing with the Scaling Up Nutrition, the SUN movement, where we're doing the community level work, but then through an iterative learning process, we're able to channel up some of the evidence so it can be part of that policy dialogue process and hopefully steer it in the right direction. Oh. Often there's a lack of explicit objectives to strengthen accountability within, I guess, Food for Peace RFAs. Thank you, almost done. And the response has been, well, we'll just do it anyway, if only indirectly. And I can say for CRS, when we've been told by Food for Peace, yeah, interesting, take it out. We just fund it with our own money, and that's the nice thing about being a PBO. But I would also just put in a plug that from now on, while we're certainly willing to continue to do that with our own private funds, it'd be nice to see recognition by Food for Peace and the importance of this, so that we're able to really scale up and achieve greater impact.
Great, thank you. Add from your group? Okay. Let's just keep hearing from different tables and building on some of these ideas, and then we will ideally have some time for discussion at the end about some of your thoughts.
Okay, so we listed our constraints first, and I'm actually pleased to report that we had a couple pages of responses. So some are in response to these and some are just in general. All right, constraints that we discussed: capacity of the community and PBO, time poverty. So if we're having committee meetings or asking folks in the community to be coming to discuss what possible social accountability mechanisms could be implemented, a lot of these women or men barely even have the time to sleep at night. So how are we going to convince them to be coming in this time poverty they're already struggling with? Access to not just information, but quality information, evidence and data about what the local political structures are and are not doing, and also what the community members are and are not doing also. And I'll come back to that a bit in a second. Literacy and skill sets are a huge hindrance, especially for women in participating in discussions around how to establish certain methodologies to improve governance and accountability. Gender and cultural dynamics, which the other group touched on. Leveraging associations, but this still leaves marginalized people, because if you're looking at PTA associations or women's groups, undoubtedly there are still people in the community that have zero affiliation with any associations at all. And that also comes with some social and cultural risks too, because engaging those marginalized, they might not feel so comfortable with doing so because they might experience some pushback from the community. Lack of systems. So, when we're assessing the capacity of community and PBO, also looking at that capacity of whatever local governance systems are there. So, do they even have fiscal devolution at the level they should? Do they even have political devolution and administrative devolution? We might know the evidence and data about what the local systems are not doing for schools or health clinics, but really they might not be able to do much if it's a done asked for much more centralized government. All right, so what could work? You have transparency mechanisms, something that everyone loves. Women's engagement to mitigate the marginalization. That's one cross-cutting theme you can look at when trying to pervade that, what I mentioned before, being those folks left out when you're working with associations. Response-ready structures. Prioritization. as an NGO, you do have some control, for lack of better terms, over how and whom you're engaging in the communities with what resources you have available. So when you're working with these associations, maybe having some zero tolerance around what pushback there might be flooding from your engagement of these marginalized communities, and then prioritizing your resources thereafter. Really making sure that your staff are aware and have knowledge about historical context in the area, not just cultural imbalances. And choosing and acting on good indicators set forth. And a few more. So as you continue on your efforts, making sure that really learning from your experiences to develop your skill sets, keeping relevant with the changing context you're hopefully affecting, and making sure that you're constantly evolving your skill sets as well. And then facilitate the facilitation role of NGOs, choosing what local associations or NGOs or general partners you may establish, being careful about your resource allocation and what information you are sharing and what you're not. Realistically, sometimes there's information that you know of that may not really benefit the community from knowing. And I don't mean a lack of transparency, but making sure that you are putting forth the most important information that they can leverage and what they're using for their own accountability establishment. And then I put at the end local and national staff. Sometimes in these conversations we forget that it's really important to be thinking about how many local nationals you have at your program country levels, and that does allow for a specific avenue to really engage community members if they're actually speaking with people from their own country who have an awareness of the cultural nature and the context in which you're working in.
Great, thank you very much. Great input so far. And so now we're going to take it over to Patrick, who I think is going to try to get our online participants to be able to share their ideas directly.
Yeah, so we're going to go to the folks online. We have Tanya from CARE who's going to present. And Tanya, go ahead and take it.
Great, thanks. I think the main thing that came out of our discussion was a need for engagement from both the bottom up as well as top down. First, that I'd say that's because of the contradiction that we can find from the policy advocacy perspective, as on the one hand we call for governments to engage their citizens, those governments themselves may not have the capacity to do so, so then we find ourselves advocating on behalf of the governments, and it starts to feel awkward or contradictory. The second reason, though, for really looking at the value of bottom-up and top-down for enabling social accountability is because of the need to engage at the most local level to address power dynamics. And when I say the most local level, we were talking about the household level. Recognizing that accountability is like a continuum of growth. It's at all levels. So there's a need that if you're working on social accountability at a community level, there's a need to recognize, factor in, and address power dynamics within a household. And that also then can ensure that you're engaging those who are most likely to be the most marginalized, or they're the least likely to have a voice. Working, though, on social accountability at the household level and then also at the national level ensures that we're not just focused at that local level, but that we're also taking into account what can be done at a national level if it is some kind of policy change. If current policy doesn't address power dynamics, or if power dynamics are embedded in a negative way in policy. We also then talked about, again at that national level, this continued challenge of ministries that can't or won't work together, recognizing that there are power dynamics even among ministries. And that can be a constraint to ensuring that there is some kind of accountability. Because if a ministry itself doesn't have power and ends up spending its energy trying to protect its own interests, they're not really going to be there trying to protect the interests of marginalized populations. And that then creates this discouragement for even engaging in a process. So some of the opportunities that we saw for addressing this were around coordinated funding within USAID's programs, say Food for Peace or the Bureau of Food Security or the Climate Change Team, making sure that how programs are implemented includes a strong social accountability element by implementing partners, but then also coordinating with the democracy and governance colleagues to the extent that they're also working on building the capacity of governments to work among themselves and to engage their citizens. The other opportunity was one of government-to-government technical assistance. Being honest with ourselves that intra-agency or inter-agency coordination, even within the U.S. government, can be a challenge. Having interagency bodies, it brings power dynamics to the table. So this is not something that's unique to developing country governments. There also then is a need, I guess, as we're looking at engaging communities and ensuring community ownership, ensuring that that's going to last. So empowering a large enough group of people to make sure that the demand on governments and agencies continues, given that social accountability is important not just for an initial implementation effort, but for ensuring that it continues to be implemented. And the same thing could be said for policy. We can change policy, but if there's no one behind it to hold the government accountable for implementing it, the policy is just words on paper. So that was how we looked at it, with the top-down, bottom-up approach.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks, Tanya. Okay, we have 2 more folks to hear from. Moving back here. Here's Robert Pitchler. Kavita.
So we talked a little bit in terms of constraints about government resources and the capacity at the local level. We also talked about people. Is that better? Okay. So the first thing we talked about was really government resources and capacity. We talked about local level, but sometimes just at all levels at the national level where they may not even exist. I think Michelle has cited an example of CAR, where she does some backstopping as well, where there really aren't any services or people aren't getting paid, so the incentive for them to continue to provide this type of support might be really challenging. The other issue that came up was sort of asking people at the local level to invest more time, because women farmers or male farmers, everyone's very busy and they don't have a lot of extra time. One of the other constraints, particularly in the Food for Peace context, are the issues of sort of social cohesion, where it might be in a post-conflict setting. There are a lot of lack of trust at the community level, where people have to rebuild sort of the social fabric of moving back to their farms, finding their farms, and just that whole process of resettling in an area is an important consideration. So a lot of that was sort of related to at the community level within communities itself. And then the other thing that we noted was trying to identify what are things a program can control and work towards and achieve results against versus things that are really beyond their control, that might be larger than the project itself, that might be too large to take on, so that those are defined, the limits of that are defined a little bit more in advance, so that they're not either as a project or even as FFP sort of setting up for a failure in a way that you're taking on more than you can chew, essentially, because there are things that you may not be able to change within the time frame of a project, but there are probably elements of that you could do more in a more thoughtful way, so that you have more of an impact over time. So in terms of the responses, we thought about flexibility in funding and establishing or changing program needs and working in partnership to sort of evaluate if this has already happened, I think, but continuing to have the space in which it might move to another location or program priorities might change, just so that they can address these evolving needs on at the country level. The other response is sort of working with civil society organizations, strengthening their capacity so that they really have more of a role of social accountability. Since they're locally established institutions,
and often represent different members of those communities to work with them more intensively to strengthen their capacity. To think about, there was a discussion about decentralized funding, and it depends a little bit on the country context and the extent to which there's a scope to do that. Certain countries, there is more scope where Food for Peace works and others less. So that's another element where that can help promote greater social accountability and ownership at the community level. And then the final point I think we have is multi-sectoral partnering with different partners across the different sectors to have more bang for your buck.
Okay, great. Any other comments from the group? Okay. Okay. For our last group, okay. Thank you, and apologies to visual learners in the room here today. We didn't actually use a sticky sheet, but thank you to the groups that did. It was nice to be able to see it. For our group, that we were looking at sort of the big questions that we need to ask when we're looking at constraints. So thinking about what practical constraints are, such as we talked about specifically sort of rural versus urban, and some of the more brass tacks type issues that might come up versus substantive constraints that might be coming up from systems-oriented approaches. And then we also looked at the importance of access and accountability, which has been discussed quite a bit, and availability of resources. But we also had a few more questions about what the sort of basics are to talk about and think about for everyone, both communities as well as international NGOs like us that are trying to facilitate this work. So what might need to be in place for building government accountability? Is that government accountability there? That's often one of the constraints. Aspiration was something that I thought was a very interesting point that came up in our discussion, both from the community side as well as from the government side. And having a look at what policies are in place to see whether they are actually whether they're actually policies that would be something that we would want to have, that people would want to hold the government accountable for, or whether they're something that needs to change as well. So are the policies themselves a constraint, or are they a potential solution? In thinking specifically about citizen groups, we saw that different citizen groups, we talked about faith-based organizations in particular, can be great allies. They can be part of the solution. And community mechanisms, community's understanding of mechanisms can both be a constraint as well as a potential solution for taking this forward. In terms of constraints, time also came up in our group for community members to participate. And another thing that we touched on only very briefly was an important solution, which is citizen measurement and evaluation. So making sure that that citizens themselves can have input into that process. There were a few other sort of general points that we had around the importance of identifying where within the government structures those hang-ups are coming. So making sure that we're sort of measuring twice and cutting once when it comes to identifying what sort of surgical intervention we need to mobilize the community for. And also being very mindful, I think that a lot of people have captured really well the importance of being inclusive, but being mindful that if we are not inclusive, we can actually magnify existing marginalization in communities. So this is not something that is optional for us. If we're going to do our jobs well, that's an important part of what we need to be looking at. Lastly, from looking at the government side, we talked about just human nature and how it is really important to make sure that we are figuring out ways to sort of incentivize the types of reactions that we're looking for. Okay, thanks. Okay, keeping in mind that this today, I think, marks the beginning of the conversation, not the sum total of the conversation. There has been so much we've covered today, and I think that we could have spent days covering some of this. We've endeavored to, CHOPS has been wonderful. There are a couple of note takers here in the room because it's an online remote participation meeting as well. There's a recording that will be, looked at so that we can begin to capture all of the really important points that were raised today. I couldn't possibly do justice to all the good ideas and important issues that were raised and try to summarize it right now. But the other issue I think is that we will make, if you have additional thoughts that you didn't get a chance to express today, we will, TOPS can follow up with some kind of email, and just whether it's an email address or an online discussion or something, just create a space where you can send your additional thoughts. Because again, there were so many big questions, there were so many points today where we just had to stop conversation in order to stay on, and we'll keep you posted on some of that World Vision research that's going on. I would like to just open the floor very briefly if anyone has any, key issues that they'd like to share, closing thoughts for the day. No, everybody's ready to go home. I think we all are, but I do want to do a special thank you to everyone. Thank you for your time and your thoughts today. Thank you to the organizations that submitted briefing notes to Food for Peace on this topic. We received oh my goodness, one from CARE, CRS, World Vision, I think it was World Vision Cambodia. Save the Children, Health Aid had one on marginalized populations, and the many organizations that also submitted briefing notes on other topics. And trust me, they are being read and they're being discussed internally, and they are informing the kinds of questions we ask in sessions like this, but the kinds of questions we'll continue to ask and try to create dialogue around it with TOPS' assistance. So with that, thank you everyone, and I'll hand it back to Sheila.
Yes, I'd like to thank you again all for coming out. Especially I'd like to thank our panelists, Mara, Rob, Bob, sorry, Andy and Bill here. Thank you so much, especially Bill for making the trip all the way from Australia just for this. Also, I'd like to thank the TOPS event team. They are wonderful. You see them all running around here, running AV and everything. And then also especially I'd like to thank Joan Whelan for her job putting this together, moderating, Suzanne and everybody else from Food for Peace for USAID. Thank you for coming here, participating, and helping to make sure that the PBL community is heard. Just a couple of other things and we'll let you go. We have 2 more of these public consultations, one that's happening the 4th for social protection, one that's happening the 11th for conflict-sensitive programming. They will all be here at FHI 360. We will be sending out information through the FSN Network newsletter, so if you get that, you'll see those. Also, if you, for some reason, don't get the FSN Network newsletter, let us know and we'll make sure you get the information. As Joan said, we have done our best to capture a lot of this. We have recording on Adobe Connect. Rachel and Jesse have been back there very diligently taking notes. We've created a page on the FSN Network website, and by Friday we'll have that information available, and we'll make sure we send out an email to all you who've registered, so you have that email link, plus everybody else on the FSN Network listserv. So I think that's it. Thank you all again.
One small note about our February 11th event. That Carlisle Levine from similar to TOPS, a support mechanism for the Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation, will be leading that session in coordination. It's a really wonderful example of 2 offices at USAID working together and 2 support mechanisms working together to make sure that we really have the right technical knowledge and the right mix of food security experience to inform the decisions we make. So thank you, Carlisle, for your work on that. So please, everyone, yes, do come to these next sessions.
Alrighty, thank you.